Okay, it's 12:05, so we'll get going. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second PlutoLMS webinar. My name is Danika, and I am the Demand Generation Manager at PlutoLMS. And I just wanted to extend a warm welcome and say that we are absolutely thrilled to have you join us today to discuss a really critical topic. Now, whether we like to admit it or not. Yes, sorry. Is there a question? Oh, no, no, sorry. Whether we like to admit it or not, sexual harassment is an issue that impacts workplaces globally. And so it's really encouraging to see you take time out of your day to join an event like this and to take a proactive step towards, fostering safer workplaces. So at PlutoLMS, we're dedicated to fostering environments where learning and development is prioritized. And today's topic is therefore especially significant for us because addressing sexual harassment effectively requires compliance, which is something that PlutoLMS can help organizations with. But it also requires a culture of sensitivity and creativity, which is exactly why we have two experts in the field with us today and why we are so thrilled to have them share their experience with us. So, with over 25 years of experience in gender-based law and policy, Jeanne Bodenstein and Sanja Bornman were perfectly positioned to co-found Thusa Consulting, where they offer practical and strategic services to help organizations prevent and combat sexual harassment in the workplace. So a bit more on our speakers. Um, to introduce to you Jeanne Bodenstein. She's a gender-based violence expert and admitted attorney. Jeanne's unique combination of experience in both gender law and labor law, along with her qualification as a commercial mediator, enables her to provide expert support in managing sexual misconduct in the workplace. Through her work at the Rape Crisis Cape Town Trust, Jeanne has contributed to national legislative and policy changes to ensure that survivors of sexual violence receive better support when accessing the criminal justice system. Additionally, underscoring her dedication to advancing gender equality, Jeanne has been recognized as a DG Murray Trust Innovation Fellow and as one of Treeshake's 50 Changemakers. Her co-founder at Thusa Consulting, Sanja Bornman, is a specialist in gender discrimination and sexual violence. With an LLB and an LLM in human rights and labor law, Sanja has consulted for numerous local and international organizations. Her expertise spans policy analysis, strategic advocacy, law reform, training, facilitation, and impact litigation. She's been instrumental in changing discriminatory laws and policies in South Africa, and she serves on the boards of several rights organizations, including the Sexual and Reproductive Justice Coalition, the Triangle Project, and the board of the South African Federation for Mental Health. Jeanne, Sanja, we're truly honored to have you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to spend some time with us and to share your expertise. We're really looking forward to learning from you. And so on that note, I won't keep you in suspense much longer, just a few practicalities. In terms of the agenda, Jeanne and Sanja will have the floor for the next 30 minutes, during which they will help us understand the definition and the different forms of sexual harassment in the workplace, as well as the necessity for creative and responsive policies, protocols, and workplace practices. Then after that, Rob McKelvey, our product success manager at PlutoLMS, will have the floor for 10 minutes, and he will discuss how our platform can help organizations implement some of the best practices and recommendations that Jeanne and Sanja will share. And then finally, we'll conclude the session with a 10-minute question and answer session. And so I know that questions may come up during the webinar and as we progress. And so please do feel free to post your questions in the chat throughout the webinar. I will take note of those, and then we can facilitate those during the question and answer discussion. So without further ado, Jeanne and Sanja, over to you.
Thank you so much, Danica, and thank you very much for having us. It's a real pleasure to be with you today, and we hope that you will find what we have to say very useful. So before we dive into sexual harassment in the workplace, I just want to reflect for a moment on a few things. The first is that sexual harassment does not happen in a vacuum. A 2022 KPMG report on private sector perceptions of gender-based violence found that while senior leaders demonstrated knowledge of the multifaceted nature, extent, and impact of gendered and sexual violence in society, they didn't necessarily view it as a threat in their own workplaces, and rather thought of it as something that's sort of out there, for example, in the media, and not something that's close to home. But the reality is that our workplaces are made up of people who live in South African society. And it's no secret that South Africa has some of the highest levels of gendered and sexual violence in the world. In other words, we have to face the fact, as Danica has already said, that our workplaces are, whether we like it or not, a microcosm of our broader community, and we have to work very consciously if we want to change that. The second reflection I have is that we have to acknowledge the beliefs and the attitudes that drive gendered and sexual violence in our communities and in our workplaces. As you will see on the slide in front of you now, gendered and sexual violence exists in a pyramid where behavior that can seem innocuous and innocent can sometimes form a basis in which sexual harassment flourishes. Now, examples can be attitudes like boys will be boys, or off-color jokes in the workplace, and that you will see that even these things can sometimes constitute sexual harassment. The third is that sexual harassment really can happen to anyone because it's never about sex. Sexual harassment is about power. And while the vast majority of the victims are women, sexual minorities and gender non-conforming people are also at a very high risk. And men can also be victims, particularly in the workplace where we are dealing with hierarchies and power disparities. And it is a tragic reality that the very same gender stereotypes that make women particularly vulnerable to sexual harassment also stop men from reporting it when it's happened to them. Next slide, please. Now, the Employment Equity Act clearly states that sexual harassment in the workplace is regarded as an automatically unfair form of discrimination. The Department of Employment and Labour has, over the years, published various codes of good practice on the handling of sexual harassment. And in 2022, however, it replaced all of those codes with a brand new consolidated code of good practice on the prevention and elimination of harassment in the workplace. And this new code, which deals with all forms of harassment, including sexual harassment, became operational as recently as March of 2023. And we really do encourage you to seek out this code online to see how your own workplace policies compare to it. The new code defines sexual harassment as unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature, whether direct or indirect, that the perpetrator knows or ought to know is not welcome. Next slide, please. So when is something sexual harassment? The code, luckily for us, prescribes a test for determining whether sexual harassment has in fact taken place. And it outlines the following factors that have to be taken into account. First of all, was the conduct based on a person's sex, gender, or sexual orientation? Second, was the conduct unwelcome or unacceptable? And this, of course, includes those instances where the perpetrator ought to have known that the conduct would be unacceptable or unwelcome. And Jeanne is going to give you some tips in a few minutes on how an employer can hedge their bets in this regard. Thirdly, what is the nature and extent of the conduct? So when we say sexual conduct, what is the nature and the extent of that conduct? And lastly, how did the conduct impact on the complainant? And that really is the subjective element of the test. How did the person on the receiving end of the conduct experience that conduct? Next slide, please. So it's not possible to outline every kind of conduct or every action that can be sexual harassment. And that's precisely why we have a definition and a test in the code. But we can divide sexual harassment in the workplace roughly into about 4 categories. Of course, we all know and understand physical forms of sexual harassment. It's often the very first kind of sexual harassment we think of when sexual harassment is spoken about. But I'd like to point out that verbal and nonverbal sexual harassment can sometimes be some of the most subtle, but also some of the most damaging forms of sexual harassment. For example, quid pro quo harassment, which is all about you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. And also the kind of nonverbal sexual harassment that may be going on when we see sexual favoritism in the workplace. Now, sexual favoritism can mean that the person who's sleeping with the boss is getting all the promotions and being taken out to drinks with senior management. Or it can mean the person who declined sleeping with the boss is sidelined or victimized in the workplace. Electronic harassment is also something that's definitely a growing trend. We are seeing more and more of that as technology progresses. And of course, it's everything from sending unsolicited pictures to pornography, dodgy emails, text messages, suggestive comments on a colleague's social media, perhaps. And it's worth pointing out that sexual harassment in the electronic form can also take place in groups, social media groups. And given an employer's legal duty to create and maintain a safe working environment, it's very important to note that the admin of, for example, a workplace WhatsApp group, who does not deal with offensive content by at the very least taking it down, may be just as guilty as the person who sent the offensive conduct to begin with. Next slide, please. So we believe that sexual harassment is not an ordinary form of workplace misconduct. It strikes at the privacy, the dignity, and the bodily integrity rights of a complainant in a way that other misconduct simply does not. And this is because it uses a deeply personal and private part of human expression as a form of power play. And there are also very unique legal and other risks for the employer when sexual harassment proliferates in the workplace. And this may include litigation, compensation claims, and reputational harm. And we've seen how sexual harassment has almost destroyed many internationally known organizations in the past where the harassment has not been dealt with properly. It's also a phenomenon that hurts the health and the well-being, not only of the complainant who has experienced the harassment, but also the workplace as a whole. And when sexual harassment goes unaddressed by an employer, it really sends a message to everybody in the workplace. And it's a message that you should be afraid, you should be mistrustful, and that your workplace is a toxic environment. There's also a major cost related to loss of productivity to consider, because the distinct emotional and psychological impact of sexual harassment, and again, not only on the complainant, can lead to tardiness, absenteeism, employees being distracted, and also a high staff turnover, poor morale, and eventually even reduced access to talent for your workplace. So, what can we do about all of this? I'm now going to hand you over to Jeanne, who has some answers.
Thank you, Sanja. And I think, especially because you highlight how sexual harassment is a very particular form of misconduct where a victim has experienced an impairment of dignity and privacy, it is important that we deal with sexual harassment in a victim-centered way. And we can achieve this by following the principles of empowerment. So firstly, providing safety to the victim. And this includes physical safety as well as psychological safety. So making sure that there is no imminent threat to the victim. The second is to restore control. And this is extremely important because of the fact that the way in which sexual harassment happens takes away the power to consent. that the victim can exercise. And it's really vital to restore that sense of control. So providing the victim with options and the ability to make choices and choose the option that is right for them. The victim should receive information. So for instance, about what services are available to them, what they can expect of the process going forward, and what they can expect from the employer. And lastly, providing ongoing support, both internally in the organization as well as through external mental health professionals. Thank you, Danica. And through our work with the organizations that we assist, we've identified 5 best practices to be followed in dealing with sexual harassment. The first one is to make sure that your policies and protocols are ready and in order. These have to be compliant with the Code of Good Practice that Sanja mentioned earlier. And it is very important that this policy can be operationalized and is implementable, not just a electronic document that is on someone's computer. So it's vital to understand who has the latest version. Are the policies and protocols available to everyone? Is everyone on the same page? Do people know where to find it? And this is something that can be achieved through a learning management system. A sexual harassment policy can outline its own procedure, or it can be integrated with the standard disciplinary processes that already exist within the organization. And in the latter situation, it is important to make sure that there is alignment between the processes and the sexual harassment policy. We recently had a client who had a very progressive sexual harassment policy, but when it had to be actioned, when they received a complaint, they realized that their disciplinary policy actually doesn't make provision for the kind of processes that are outlined in the sexual harassment policy that have been imagined to support the victim. And this creates uncertainty, not only for the victim of what they can expect, but also for the perpetrator of what they can expect of the process. Thank you, Danica. The second best practice we want to highlight is to establish reporting options. It's advisable to have more than one line of reporting. So for instance, complaints can be received by the Human Resource Department, as well as other complaint receivers that have been identified in the organization. And it's even possible to identify an outside complaint receivers that is not part of the organizational structure. And this really helps address a situation where if employees don't feel comfortable confident in the internal mechanisms. Everyone must understand these reporting options. No one must wonder where they should report or how this process will work. And those who receive reports should know what is expected of them. For instance, how do we take a statement? Should we complete a form? Is there a central repository where these complaints can be stored? And did the complaint receivers undergo training on how to take a statement from a victim that has suffered trauma? The third best practice deals with training. So there must be regular or annual training of all staff, not only on the policy, but also on what is acceptable behavior in the workplace, what is appropriate and what is not. This training should also form part of the induction of new employees, and there must be a record of who has been trained and therefore who should have known what behaviors are not appropriate and what constitutes sexual harassment. And again, this is something that a learning management system like Pluto can assist with. The fourth best practice is to involve experts in the field. And the in-house capacity of an HR team might be limited, or it might be best used to deal with the daily operations of the organization. And it's possible to speed up investigations and disciplinary processes by involving outside help. External psychosocial support services for victims should be identified from the get-go and should be part of the standard sexual harassment policy and protocol. It shouldn't be a situation where we wonder, should we involve someone to provide psychosocial support? This option must always be available to the victim to choose if they want to do this or not. And also to remember, as Sanja said earlier, that it might not only directly influence the victim, but also their team and their colleagues and the bigger organization. So if sensitization training or corrective counseling is something that is imagined as part of a possible sanction, it's also important that service providers be identified beforehand. And the last best practice that we want to highlight is that a disciplinary system for sexual harassment can be flexible while being fair instead of being overly formal. And when we think of disciplinary processes, immediately our thoughts tend to go to something that looks like a court or something that is set up like a court, and we use perhaps overly formal or legalistic language. A victim-centered approach means that the processes and policies, the processes and the application can be adapted to serve the needs of the survivor and the victim, while still making sure that the process is being complied with. And it can include both formal and informal processes. And even when a formal process is being followed that has to be substantively and procedurally fair, it does not mean that this has to result in a formal hearing. The circumstances of the specific situations should be considered, and it might even be appropriate to approach external experts for advice. When it is decided that a formal hearing is required, there are ways to limit the secondary victimization and secondary trauma suffered by the victim. And one of the ways is to make sure that we provide a separate room for the victim to testify in, or we can have a hearing through documents instead of being physically present and hearing verbal testimony. And another way I've mentioned earlier is to avoid creating a court atmosphere by using court jargons like prosecute, defense, and accused. And we hope that if we look at these 5 best practices, and if they are implemented in organizations, that can help organizations to offer safety to their employees and to create safe workplaces. Thank you, Danica.
Jeanne, Sanja, thank you so much for that insightful discussion. You've really given us a lot to mull over and a lot of implementable practices to take with us. And so thank you for that. And I'd just like to mention to the audience that we will be sharing the presentation slides as well as a fact sheet that Thusa has put together afterwards in an email with you guys. So you can take this back to your workplaces to implement. And Jeanne, Sanja, I think you have, you mentioned in one of your best practices that it's often better to call in the experts when dealing with a critical issue like sexual harassment. And so you've also, in your presentation, just proven that Thusa Consulting is a sensitive and creative service provider. So I would like to encourage the audience, whether you need expert advice on creating a safe working environment, whether you're looking to protect your workplace productivity, or whether you require an objective third party to handle sexual harassment complaints. Thusa Consulting has the experience, the sensitivity, and the creativity to support your organization as you foster a safe working environment for all. So do feel free to reach out. We will be sharing a form at the end of the webinar as well, which you can fill in to have Thusa get in touch with you. You can get in touch with them via their website. Their contact details are in the slides as well. So do keep them top of mind. With that, I will now hand over to Rob from PlutoLMS, and he'll take us through some practical ways in which our platform can help you implement what Jeanne and Sanja have shared so far.
Thank you, Nika. And yeah, thank you, Jeanne and Sanja, for sharing your invaluable insights and expertise with us today. It's quite clear that addressing sexual harassment in the workplace requires not just compliance, but also a thoughtful and sensitive and creative approach. I'm excited to show you how PlutoLMS can support the best practices Jeanne and Sanja have highlighted and help your organization manage sexual harassment effectively. There are three key aspects that make PlutoLMS particularly well-suited to support proactive intervention strategies. This includes the ability to provide employees with easy access to up-to-date policies and procedures, comprehensive onboarding and training, and regular refresher training. Before we dive into the specifics, let's just briefly touch on what a learning management system is. An LMS is a digital platform designed to create, deliver, manage, and track training programs. Essentially, it acts as a centralized hub where all of your learning-related content and activities are coordinated and streamlined. The system can be used to deliver a wide range of educational content, from compliance training and professional development courses to onboarding programs and refresher training. A learning management system like PlutoLMS is not just a tool for training delivery, it's a comprehensive solution for managing all aspects of learning and development within your organization. By enabling you to centralize training content, ensure accessibility, and track employee progress, PlutoLMS is an integral component of an informed, compliant, and proactive workplace. Keeping sexual harassment policies and procedures up to date and readily available not only ensures compliance with legal standards, but also promotes a transparent and supportive workplace culture. It empowers employees with knowledge they need to handle situations confidently and appropriately. So here's how we can help. PlutoLMS allows you to host all your sexual harassment policies and procedures in one easily accessible location. This means that employees no longer need to search through multiple systems or documents to find what they need. By centralizing your policies, you ensure that everyone in your organization has quick and easy access to information they need when they need it. With PlutoLMS, you can also update your policies in real time. Whenever there's a change in regulations or internal policies, you can instantly update the documents in the system. This reduces confusion, enhances understanding, and ensures that your workforce is always aligned with the latest guidelines. Finally, our robust search functionality allows employees to quickly find and reference specific policies and procedures when they need clarity. So whether they're in a challenging situation or just need to confirm a detail, they can easily search for and find the relevant policies and procedures. This not only boosts employee confidence in handling situations appropriately, but also reinforces their understanding of the company's commitment to addressing sexual harassment effectively. Comprehensive onboarding that includes sexual harassment training is crucial for setting the right tone from day one. It ensures that new employees understand the company's stance on sexual harassment, are aware of the policies in place, and know how to navigate and report any issues. Effective onboarding can significantly reduce the likelihood of misconduct and create a safer, more respectful workplace. PlutoLMS allows you to create personalized onboarding paths that include mandatory sexual harassment training modules tailored to your organization's needs. Additionally, it enables you to make training more engaging and memorable with interactive content format such as videos, quizzes, and simulations. This ensures that each new hire receives training that aligns with your company's policies and culture while enhancing engagement and retention of training material, leading to a better compliance and a more informed workforce. The great thing about PlutoLMS is that you can easily track and document each employee's progress and completion status to ensure that everyone has undergone the necessary training. This ensures accountability and provides you with a clear overview of who has completed the required training. It also allows you to identify and address any gaps in training. Yearly refresher training is essential for maintaining a safe and informed workforce. It ensures that employees remain aware of the latest policies and practices, reinforcing their understanding and commitment to preventing sexual harassment. PlutoLMS allows you to set automated reminders to ensure employees complete their annual refresher courses on time. This helps maintain a regular training schedule without the need for constant manual oversight. By automating reminders, you can ensure consistent participation in refresher training, reducing the risk of lapses in knowledge and compliance. Pluto also allows you to incorporate assessments and feedback mechanisms to gauge the understanding and effectiveness. This lets you measure how well employees grasp the training material and identify areas where further education may be needed. Through continuous feedback, you can improve training programs, making them more effective over time. So in conclusion, PlutoLMS offers a comprehensive platform that supports sensitive, responsive, and creative approaches to managing sexual harassment training in the workplace. By leveraging our platform, organizations can ensure that policies are up to date, training is effective and continuous, and support mechanisms are robust.
Thank you, Rob, for sharing how PlutoLMS can help. I'd just like to comment on that it really has been a highlight of my experience as an employee at PlutoLMS to see the many ways in which a multifaceted learning management system can help organizations make a real world impact and address real world topics such as sexual harassment and employee misconduct and make a difference in employee productivity and the general safety and happiness of employees in the workplace. So yeah, just wanted to mention that. And then same as with Thusa Consulting, if you'd like to have a conversation with a member of the PlutoLMS team about how we can help you foster a safer work environment, a more compliant work environment, please do feel free to reach out using the form or the contact details shared. Then I'd like to open the floor to any questions. So we'll give it a few minutes. If anyone does have a question, please pop that in the chat. And we will give you the floor and you can ask your question to the speakers and we can get that conversation going. Okay, Sarah Widendal has a question. Sarah, please go ahead.
Hello, thanks so much for such a great webinar. I know it's quite a hectic topic. I had a question on the policy. So if you have your harassment policy, obviously that will include your sexual harassment and all the harassment that you've gone through. But do you need to actually say the procedure if someone does have a harassment case or they want to report it? Because what I've always done is just put in the policy, refer to the grievance policy. And then in the grievance policy, you'll say it's informal, formal, and go through that process. So that's how I've done it. I don't know if I should be maybe more detailed in the harassment policy and actually do a guideline for harassment specifically and sexual harassment.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. That's a great question. I think however you want to do it has to recognize, firstly, that sexual harassment is as it is a particular form of misconduct, it is also a particular form of harassment that has to do with the victim's most private life. So if your harassment policy makes provision for that, and is in line with the code, so it sets out that sexual harassment isn't allowed in the workplace, etc., etc., the process then can be the same as your grievance process. However, it has to speak to each other. The last thing that you want is to receive a sexual harassment complaint. It refers you to the grievance policy, but now suddenly the grievance policy doesn't make provision for instance, a hearing only by documentary evidence, or it doesn't make provision for the type of secondary victimization limitations that, for instance, a victim can testify in a different room. So as long as they are really integrated and that they are updated regularly and stay integrated, you can definitely use existing policies. But you don't want to get to a situation where suddenly no one knows what's going on, and it's uncertain for everyone because they don't actually speak the same language.
Thank you. That's clear. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Jeanne. Any other questions? Please do post them in the chat.
Danica, sorry, as I listened to Rob, I thought it might be a good idea to just reiterate, and I know Sanja has mentioned the legal obligation of the employer already, but when we speak about compliance, the Employment Equity Act requires all employers to eliminate and prevent all forms of harassment, including sexual harassment, because sexual harassment is on the basis of sex or gender or sexual orientation. So it's not only that there is an obligation, it's also that there are consequences if that obligation is not implemented. So if the employer becomes aware of a sexual harassment complaint and then does not do everything in their power to eliminate future harassment and to address the harassment that did happen, there are severe legal consequences that employers face. So as much as this is a topic that often people feel uncomfortable with, or they don't want to deal with, or no one in HR want to actually speak about what this means for us when we receive a complaint, the law really does force employers to deal with this. If I can just do a little ad break for Thusa Consulting. I mean, you've mentioned that Sanja and I really have decades of experience in this field, and we know that it's a difficult topic. We've just spoken about how this is even difficult for our families to talk about, and we've been doing this work for years. So we know that it's not something that everyone wants to talk about and think about all the time, but that is really why there are experts like Thusa Consulting, so that we can deal with the messiness, and your organizational team doesn't have to.
Thank you, Jeanne. Incredible. And yeah, I just can reiterate, the how appreciative we are. I think as the general population, the ones who are uncomfortable about speaking this population, how thankful we are that organizations like Thusa do exist and that you are willing to take this bull by the horns. So yeah, Thank you for that. And then I think if there aren't any other questions, last chance for questions, I think then we can end things there for the day. On the screen now, I'd just like to share again, like I said, this will be shared via an email after the webinar, but here you can use the QR code or the link to, that link is also in the chat currently pinned, to a form that you can fill in to have Thusa Consulting contact you back or PlutoLMS contact you back. And yeah, just start a conversation if you want to foster a safer work environment and get access to the expertise that you need to do so. Without any other, you know, bells and whistles, I think we can call it a day. Again, thank you, Jeanne and Sanja, for your time. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And I hope you have a lovely weekend.
Thank you, Danica. And if you are in Cape Town, please enjoy the sunshine.
Yes.
We have missed it. Thanks for hosting us.
Perfect.
Thanks, everyone. Take
Goodbye,
care.
everyone.